All right, what's up, guys? This is Michael coming at you today, hooked on football. Something a little different. Just going to do a solo episode today. Going to break down the new top 20 AP top 25 that came out today. Just going to go 1 to 25, give my thoughts on each team, where they're at, whether they deserve it, what to look for, and that'll be that. So hop right in. Georgia, number one. They were number one last week. We learned nothing about them last week because they did not play a good opponent. And to be frank, Georgia really doesn't play hardly any competition all season. I was going through their schedule. They don't have a ranked team currently on the schedule till November 11th. November 11th, that is Ole Miss. They go to Tennessee the week after that. Outside of that, they play absolutely no one out of conference. And even their SEC competition is pretty mediocre. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm sure Georgia is really good, but we didn't learn anything week one. Michigan's at number 2. They stay in their number 2 spot from last week. Michigan looked pretty mediocre, I thought, this past week. They did not play a very good East Carolina team. They really didn't run the ball very well. They ran for 122 total yards. Blake Corum, who likely would have won last year's Heisman had he not got hurt, 10 carries, 73 yards. So kind of weird, not a great running game. J.J. McCarthy looked really good. I think he was 26 of 30, 280 yards, 3 touchdowns, something like that. So that was really good news. If Michigan's passing attack is going to work, that's a good sign of things to come for them this year. But yeah, a bit of a concern there with a mediocre run game, and they just really didn't look that great in the second half. So we're not going to learn anything about Michigan for a few more weeks. They do not play anyone challenging here. I think they have 2 more non-conference games against no ones, Rutgers, before we get to any sort of test in the Big Ten for them. Alabama, same story. Didn't play good competition. Jalen Milroe, the new quarterback, looked good. They play Texas this week. Texas goes to Tuscaloosa. We will learn much more about Alabama after that game. Florida State came in at number 4. They hopped up a few spots here. I said on the podcast, or at the end of the podcast yesterday, they are my top team. That win over LSU was super impressive. They are loaded with talent. They really, again, I know this is like a common theme, but they do not have a very challenging schedule. I was going through it. They have 2 ranked teams on their schedule at this point remaining in the year. They go on the road to Clemson September 30th. Now, I will say I think that could be a tricky spot. We'll get to Clemson later, but I think that could be a redemption spot for Clemson. So that could be tricky. But outside of Clemson, the only other ranked team they have on their schedule is Duke. Duke is now ranked because they beat Clemson last night. So again, we're going to get to that more later. Florida State, by far and away the most impressive week 1 team. Not even close. Easily had the best win. It's going to be what we learn about them from here on out. Honestly, Florida State's a team that struggled with consistency through the years. So that will be one thing we'll learn about them. Can they get through these week to week, some of these middle of the road type teams, and can they get through them easily? But otherwise, yeah, they don't really have a real challenge. So they go to Clemson here in about, I guess, end of this month. Ohio State, they played Big Ten foe Indiana. They were on the road at Indiana. I did not think Ohio State looked very good. Defense looked great, but a new quarterback, Kyle McCord, quite mediocre. He threw for, it was right around 200 yards, 0 touchdowns. He has the best wide receiver core in the country, threw for 0 touchdowns. He did have an interception. Good news for Ohio State. Not that Indiana was good, and no one thought Indiana was going to be good this year, but they do have a couple cream puffs on the schedule. I'm sure they will get gelling, or that offense will get gelling here the next couple weeks. They are at home at the Horseshoe. They should put up some big numbers, should give McCord some confidence, and he's going to need it because they go to Notre Dame end of September. It's a couple weeks away. They go to Notre Dame. That's one's at South Bend. Going to be a very fun game, but overall, kind of a shaky debut for my Ohio State. Obviously can't rule them out, though. They are Ohio State. USC's number 6. I don't really feel like we've really learned anything about USC so far. I mean, Caleb Williams is awesome. They've got a ton of skill players. They're putting up crazy numbers on offense, but it's the same thing they did last year. I've been watching the defense. So here's a stat for you. So far this year, 2 games, San Jose State and Nevada. They have given up an average of 378 yards a game. Last year, they gave up 415 yards a game. That 415 was at the end of the season, of course. So I would say concerning trend when you've already given up 378 yards on average to San Jose State and Nevada. But again, we haven't seen USC actually play anyone that's any good. So not a lot that we know, not a lot of new information that we know on them yet. So whatever, I'm fine with them sitting at 6. Penn State's at 7. I thought Penn State had a good debut. I should say this. Penn State looked pretty good. Drew Aller, their new quarterback, I thought looked really impressive. I thought their defense looked solid overall. It was kind of a sloppy game. They were clearly, if you actually sat and watched that game against West Virginia, they were very obviously the better team. They made a couple mistakes here and there, missed a couple. It should have been 20-7 at half. They missed a couple chip shot field goals. The score was a little deceiving there. It was never in doubt. Penn State was clearly the better team. I still think Penn State's really good. The question mark was Drew Aller. What was he going to look like? I thought he looked really good. So I'd say that's a great sign for Penn State. They go to Illinois and then have Iowa at home here. I think they have a cupcake this coming week, and then they go out to Illinois and Iowa at home. So we'll learn a little more about them through that stretch. Washington's number 8. Washington looked really good. Michael Penix was awesome. 450 yards, 5 touchdowns. Probably, if you had to make your Heisman ballot after week 1, you'd probably have Sanders 1, and then Penix probably 2. So really impressive there. They go to Michigan State, I think not this week, but next week. That'll be a much more telling game. Tennessee, I feel like this is just kind of saying the same things here week 1. And that's partly how it goes because a lot of teams just don't schedule tough competition. And that's a whole nother conversation. I don't know if you always get rewarded for scheduling tough competition, but anyways, Tennessee is just another team that didn't play anyone this week. And another SEC team that doesn't really play anyone difficult for another month or so. So yeah, nothing really on Tennessee. Notre Dame was 10. They moved up 3 spots to this 10 spot. I think Notre Dame personally, I don't see any reason why they shouldn't have jumped Tennessee. I don't know why Tennessee sits above them. I think they could have jumped Washington potentially. I think Notre Dame's been super impressive. I get it. Navy, I can't even tell you the opponent they played past Saturday. I get it. Competition hasn't been great, but they're obliterating the competition that they have played. They've given up 3 points each game. The offense with Sam Hartman looks awesome. Yeah, I couldn't be more impressed with Notre Dame personally. I just think they look really good. They go to NC State this week. That's an interesting game. Definitely a game they should win, but obviously going to be by far and away the best competition they've played so far. We'll be curious how they look there. And then, as we mentioned when we talked about Ohio State just a second ago, they do have Ohio State coming down the pipe as well. So Notre Dame, to me, Florida State is my top team that I've seen so far, but Notre Dame has looked really good. I thought they could look really good, but they've looked better than expected. So absolutely deserve a top 10 spot. Texas played Rice this past week. Texas number 11. They played Rice. We didn't learn much. They were a little sloppy, but it just kind of is what it is. They got through it. They won handedly. They go to Alabama this week. Like we talked about Alabama, we're going to know much more about Texas after that game this week. Steve and I will break down that Alabama-Texas game probably tomorrow or Thursday when we kind of do our podcast ahead of the weekend. Utah moved up 2 spots to number 12. I thought Utah looked really good against Florida last Thursday. They did not have Cam Rising, who's their stud QB. Had to go with the backups. They played a true freshman a little bit, but regardless, still looked really good. Defensively, they lost one of their best linebackers, I think Florida's first offensive possession or something like that. So I thought Utah, impressive win. I know Florida's not a great team in the SEC, but whatever. They manhandled them. It was never, in my opinion, that game was really never in doubt. I thought Utah played really well, and they were down their best offensive player. And I don't know if that linebacker, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but I don't know if he's their best defensive player, but I know he was an important defensive piece, and they were without him. And in that game, again, was just never really in doubt. So I was impressed with Utah. I think Utah's a team to keep an eye on. Oregon's number 13. We didn't really learn anything about Oregon. I think it's this week. Oregon goes to Texas Tech. Let me verify that, make sure I'm not full of it here. Yeah, they do. They go to Texas Tech this week. So that should be an interesting game. I want to keep an eye on. And then they actually have Colorado in a couple weeks. So We don't really know much about Oregon right now, but we will know more shortly. LSU 14, they fell down 9 spots from number 5. I said it yesterday on the podcast. I still think this LSU team is really dangerous. I still think they're loaded with talent. They had there was 2 possessions in that Florida State game where they were in the Florida State red zone and turned the ball over on downs. If they convert those to points, who knows where that game goes. Jaden Daniels is still awesome. Yeah, I still think LSU is good, and the schedule gets pretty soft for them here for a while, so they're going to have a lot of time to recoup. They're going to be able to beat up on some teams that aren't as good, get some confidence back. So I would not write LSU off. I think Florida State is very good, and I think LSU was not too terribly far behind them. So again, they fell. They're going to be kind of out of the limelight here for a little bit, but keep an eye on LSU to reemerge here later in the year. K-State, I got nothing. They didn't really play anyone last week. I don't think they really play anyone for a little bit. Yeah, I don't know. They're a solid program. They finished the year strong last year. I think that's probably partly why they are where they are. Yeah, but I don't know. Nothing to report. Nothing noteworthy. Oregon State. Oregon State looked really solid week 1. Ugandale, the Clemson transfer, I'm probably saying his name wrong, played really well, put up some big numbers. Pac-12 is loaded with QBs. Oregon State goes, I think they have Utah end of this month, and I think that was really the first game I could identify that's a big one for them. So, yeah, good for Oregon State though. They've been not real relevant here for several years, so kind of fun to see them crack the top 20 there. North Carolina was up 4 spots after beating South Carolina. I will say this. I thought it was an impressive win over South Carolina. I really wasn't sure how they would handle that spot. We know they have a ton of offense, haven't played as well on defense, but they appear to have gotten better over the offseason, at least defensively. So that was interesting to see. Minnesota goes to North Carolina here in 2 weeks. That's going to be a really interesting matchup. Minnesota is the opposite of North Carolina. They play great defense, very little offense, whereas North Carolina has stereotypically been a lot of offense, not very much defense. Although, again, it looked like maybe they're trying to change that. So that'll be a fun one to look out for here in a couple of weeks. Oklahoma, number 18. Yeah, they obliterated the team they played Saturday. The opposing coach was crying on the sidelines. I don't know what was going on there. What I do know is Oklahoma's schedule sucks. They have 1 ranked opponent on their schedule. Literally go Google it right now. 1 ranked team on the schedule at the moment. That is Texas. Yeah. So anyways, Oklahoma is probably going to continue to climb these rankings all season because, again, it is ridiculous how soft that schedule is. I don't even think they play K-State. So anyways, Oklahoma, or no, they definitely don't, because I just said they only had 1 ranked team on their schedule and K-State's ranked ahead of them. So yeah, keep an eye on Oklahoma. I think they're going to be pretty good this year. And like I said, they don't play anyone, so there's no reason they shouldn't keep moving up these rankings. Wisconsin, 19. They didn't move. That probably feels about right. They were not all that impressive against Buffalo. Again, you go look at the final score and you go, oh, yeah, pretty standard. Wisconsin beat up on Buffalo, but that was a close game in the first half. Wisconsin's definitely got some things to tighten up there. 19 is probably a fitting spot for them. Again, they did pull away. They did win convincingly in the end, but it was a little close for comfort. Ole Miss was 20th, or comes in at 20th. They beat the crap out of Mercer. Interesting game this week, though. They, I believe, travel to Tulane. Tulane is ranked 24th. So we'll talk about them in a second. But Ole Miss goes to Tulane, and then they actually have Alabama a couple weeks after that. So interesting spot. They come in. They're at number 20. I don't remember if Ole Miss was ranked. They were 22. They're up 2 spots this week. So yeah, we'll learn a lot more about Ole Miss here the next few weeks. At Tulane this week, and then Bama in a couple weeks. Duke is number 21. Yeah, Duke obviously they just cracked because they beat Clemson last night, and great win for them on the road. No one saw that one coming. I don't know what the odds were on that, but it had to have been pretty overwhelmingly in favor of Clemson. I don't have anything really to say about Duke. I don't actually think Duke is probably that good. That game, it was a weird game. Clemson turned the ball over 3 times, I think, inside the red zone, something crazy. But good for Duke. They capitalized, they won, and they're in the top 25 for the time being. Colorado cracks the top 25 at 22. You knew that was coming. TCU was ranked, I think, 19th last week, preseason poll. So they deserve it. They shocked the world. I mean, there's not really much to say about Colorado that people probably haven't already heard at this point, but yeah, good for Colorado. Number 22, fun one against Nebraska. Steve and I are going to break that one down more again on our next podcast this week. We're going to get into the nitty gritty of that. I'm really excited to see that one. Nebraska is such a different team from TCU. They are going to play the absolute opposite style of football that TCU did. TCU got into a track meet with Colorado. That was the wrong strategy. I think where Colorado is susceptible is to a power team that likes to run the football. And that is going to be Nebraska. Nebraska, I think, is going to slow it down. They're going to be super physical. It's going to be a fun game to watch. Texas A&M came in at 23. They looked good in their home opener. I don't have much to say on them because they didn't play anybody. They didn't play anybody impressive, and they don't play anybody impressive for a while. But I did say in my preseason, I think A&M's a team to keep an eye on. I think they're going to be out to make a bit of a statement after an embarrassing season last year. So I think A&M could be a pretty good team. Tulane's 24. I believe they are the only non-Power 5 in the top 25 right now. They play Ole Miss this week. That's at Tulane. That will be a fun game. I think it's a game that's flying a little bit under the radar, but certainly a big, very big game for Tulane. I mean, I'm sure that's probably the only ranked opponent they have on the schedule this year. So if they have any hopes of making any sort of big bowl game on the road, they really need to beat Ole Miss. And I'm always curious to see what a team like Ole Miss looks in this spot, because the game's going to mean more to Tulane, but at the same time, it's an important game for Ole Miss to win. So that'll be an interesting one to keep an eye on. We finish Clemson, number 25, the last ranked team in the AP poll. They are down 16 spots from their preseason ranking in the top 10. Kind of incredible, to be frank, that they even get to keep their top 25 spot. Steve and I were texting earlier, and he made a comment. So last week, I think it was Iowa was 25th last week in the AP top 25. Steve and I mentioned, I think yesterday, that we're from Iowa, so we keep a close eye on Iowa and Iowa State. Iowa was 25. Iowa beats Utah State. They weren't particularly impressive, but they did win. They drop out of the top 25. Clemson loses by 3 touchdowns at home to Duke, who no one has any expectations for, and they go to number 25. They don't fall out. That is the blue chip treatment. When you are a blue chip program, you get treated differently. And I don't care if you're listening to this and you're a fan of a blue chip program. Hey, I like Michigan. I said that before, and it's just the truth. Blue chip programs get treated differently. When you grow up around Iowa and Iowa State like we did, you see it. The treatment's different. There is zero room or zero margin for error if you are an Iowa type team. Clemson has a little more margin for error. Look, I said it earlier. Clemson turned the ball over 3 times. Again, I think it's 3 times within the red zone last night. Kind of a weird game, maybe a bit of a fluky game. I don't know, whatever. It's still a terrible loss. Losing to Duke at home 28-7 is just rough. It doesn't really matter how you slice it. I will say this. We still know Clemson has a ton of talent on that program. Clemson has a big game with Florida State here in a couple weeks. I think, like I said, against Florida State, or like I said, above with Florida State, I think that's a huge redemption spot for Clemson. I think Dabo is going to have those guys absolutely fired up, and I would look for them to make a statement or try to make a statement. Florida State's really, really good. I think that's going to be a great game, though. I think, look, we know Dabo's a great coach. That is going to be that had to have been an extremely disappointed locker room after that loss last night. But I think he gets them fired up. I don't think they play anyone here for a couple weeks. They get to come back against Florida State. They get their redemption shot. That'll be a fun one to keep an eye out for. But that's top 25. Only other thing I was going to mention here really quickly. Again, Steve and I grew up here in Iowa. We follow Iowa State closely. Iowa was 25 last week. They fall out of the rankings. Kind of interesting. One of those games where you win and yet you fall out of the rankings because apparently the win wasn't impressive enough. Iowa plays Iowa State this week. Power 5 matchup. Keep an eye out. That's a big rivalry in the state of Iowa. Iowa wins. They might sneak back in. But outside of that, that is all I have for you. That is every team in the top 25 with a little commentary on each. Let us know what your thoughts are. You agree, disagree with the rankings? You agree, disagree with any of my takes on any of the teams? Let us know in the comments. But otherwise, appreciate everyone watching. And like I said, Steve and I will be back probably tomorrow and we'll break down the action for this coming weekend.